So I'm going to give you a little background as to how this came to be. How does a Chicago architect, photographer end up at Notre Dame in this kind of intimate way? So growing up in California, I was a potter in high school. I was never going to go to college. I was going to be a potter, and making $2.50 an hour. And my parents moved to from Newport Beach to Kansas City, and I thought that was a really bad idea. So I stayed in California, and then all my friends went off to college, and I was working in a pottery, and my girlfriend, who was a year younger, her dad said, "We love you, Tom, but not all the time." And so my big dream of being, an artist kind of fell apart, and so I decided, well, maybe I'll go to college. So I went to Rhode Island School of Design in pottery, and because my parents by then had moved to Connecticut. So I'm from a family of 9 kids. So my dad's deal was, I'll pay the state rate for college, but anything over that you pay. So RISD was 2 times the cost of state school. So I had to pay for half of college, and I'm thinking, well, I already know how to be a potter. I'd worked as a production potter. Maybe I'll study architecture. And so that's what I did. And then I came to Chicago and worked at Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. But while at RISD, I was a kid in high school. If the waves were good, I was surfing, not in high school. So my academic career was less than distinguished. I never could have gotten into architecture school. So at RISD, I could just change departments and end up an architect. So part of what happened there was all of a sudden I learned about art and architectural history, and I fell in love with it. Really fell in love with it. And I was a teacher's assistant for architectural history and ended up winning the Senator Claiborne Pell Award for Art and Architectural History at RISD, and my parents were like, I think they got the wrong guy. I think they've made a mistake. This can't be, and my mom graduated from college the same day I did. She went back, and so they couldn't come to my college graduation, so I brought them the award, and they were like, well, it's real. But one of the courses that was profound for me there was a history course called The History of Music and Art. And it was really culture, music, and art. And what you would do is you would go into, this is in the old days, right? This is 1975, where you went into a listening carol, and the professor had given us auditory, so you'd listen to the selections. You had to read text of what was happening at the time, and then you would look at a portfolio of pictures, literally, that were in a folio. And so what it did is it tied culture, music, art all together, and I found it just fascinating. So it was a social history and so forth. And then it was also, you remember, in 1975 through maybe 1990, postmodernism was all the rage. So people were designing buildings, kind of modern versions of historical buildings. That was postmodernism, like, let's say, Tom Beebe's Chicago Public Library with the big gargoyles and sort of pastiche historical architecture. So one of the things that we learned was how to do a series of drawings called analytique. And analytique at the École des Beaux-Arts were drawings where, and you've seen them before, they're those beautiful watercolors where you see a plan, a section, an elevation, details, all in watercolor. So we learned to do those. So fast forward. I come to be an architect at Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, end up working for a real estate developer, end up starting a design build company here in Chicago. So we called McClear. So we did the Rookery building, the Reliance building, Carson Perry Scott. We also did great big data centers, like we redid the R.R. Donnelley facility. We did a bunch of buildings at Abbott Labs, Bank of America. So 3 of us started the company the same week my son was born, and it grew to 550 people. And we sold that company to AECOM, which is now the largest engineering firm in the world. So there I am, a hippie Potter kid that goes to RISD. Now I'm in a dark suit and a white shirt and a tie every day, flying around the country, running a big company, and now part of a public company. And I did that for 8 years. And then when they went public, they weren't going to fire me. They were just going to torture me. So I thought that was a bad idea. And so I quit. And this was 20 plus years ago. So then I became an architectural photographer. And I went with Gunny Harbaugh, who was our preservation architect, who did the Rookery and all that stuff. He said, we're going to Copenhagen, and you should come because you get all of your learning units for your registration that year by coming on this trip for a week. I'm like, that's great. I've never been to Copenhagen. So I went to Copenhagen. I fell in love photographing architecture. I came back and I said, I'm going to be an architectural photographer. So that's what I did, and it's been so much fun. I've just loved it. So I got to go full circle and become an artist again. I was in Paris in, let's see, it was 2016, and I thought, you know, I can make an analytique photographically. So the image you're seeing on the right-hand side is a photograph that I took of Notre Dame, where you see both the inside and the outside simultaneously. And the rose window, how is that rose window lit up like that? They're black when you look at them from the outside. I photographed it from the inside, turned it around and put it on the building. You see all the people as a blur. That's because they've been coming for 800 years, so I thought it was just going to be a stream that would continue. And then I cut open the side aisle so that you got a glimpse into the building. So I made this and I thought, this is a really interesting idea. And so I began to make these photographic analytiques. Fast forward, I'm at Exeter Prep School photographing Louis Kahn's Exeter Library on April 15th, 2019. And that's the day the Notre Dame burned. So when we took a break, we go to a cafe in this little town of Exeter, and there on CNN is the cathedral burning. I'm sitting in tears, just horrified as the whole world was horrified. You know, you're watching this thing, and when I make these photographs, you form a relationship with the building and the place. So I was overwhelmed. I finished the work I was doing at Exeter. I flew back to Chicago, and my French friend, I said, we have to find out who's renovating the church, and I'd like to make an edition of these photographs that will sell, and the money, the proceeds will go to the church. So that's in fact what we did. We ended up speaking to Michel Picot, the president of Friends of Notre Dame. He said, well, it so happens I'm coming to Chicago in 2 weeks. Why don't you make an event, and I'll talk about the night of the fire, and you can talk about your piece, and we'll see if they sell. So that's what we did, and the pieces sold out, and we raised about $25,000, which went to them. So it was set up, so that was a 501c3. People could write a check, get a tax deduction, get a piece of art, and so that began a relationship with the cathedral. Michel then, I think the largest donors outside of France are American. And so Michel was a telecom executive and a wonderful man. And then André Finot was the vice president of communications at the cathedral. And so they both traveled together, and I ended up introducing them to a number of people in Chicago, and we were able to raise a bunch of money for them. So that's how I got involved. As soon as the cathedral burned, Macron said immediately, we're going to rebuild the cathedral. So I think to fully understand Notre Dame, kind of like why St. James would make this whole exhibition, because Notre Dame is literally the heart of Paris. I mean, what he says here is correct. All the addresses in France, I don't know if you know this, radiate from Notre Dame. So the zip codes and so forth radiate out from there. So, and I'm going to read this, I guess. Across all Notre Dame, the heart of Paris, treasure of Ile de la Cité, has just suffered the most trying moment in its long history. Across all lands and cultures of the world, this drama leaves us speechless, touching the hearts and arresting the gaze of everyone. It reminds us all how much architecture, as indeed every artifact, is a fragile thing. Notre Dame is now the tragic proof that preservation of our rich built heritage, the tangible traces of the great heights of craftsmanship that have been achieved, wherever they may be, is indispensable. This incandescent wound also reveals the emotional dimension carried by architecture and how its universal cultural value, its unique symbolic force, and its mythical dimension nourish the arts, literature, and every individual's own personal geography. I think that's a beautiful summary of what then ensues. And we all saw these pictures on CNN that night, right? Of people sitting and praying, people singing, this kind of great outpouring in Paris. And I think Winston Churchill said something that I've always related to. There is no doubt whatever about the influence of architecture and structure upon human character and action. We make our buildings, and afterwards they make us. They regulate the course of our lives. And this is really true. I mean, we think about architecture, and it has enormous power. Paul Goldberger put it another way. Commodity, firmness, and delight is something that's quoted often in talking about architecture. Vitruvius wrote this in 30 BC, but Goldberger wrote in his book, Why Architecture Matters, Vitruvius presents these conflicting realities of architecture, not as a paradox, but as a matter of coexistence. His point is to remind us that a building must be simultaneously useful, well-built, and visually appealing. Paul Goldberger came to Chicago to dedicate Unity Temple when it was redone, which Gunny Harbaugh, again, this architect that had worked for us at McClear, had renovated that. I had photographed it, and so I sent a note to Paul Goldberger to drive him from the airport, or from Unity Temple to the airport, so I could spend an hour talking with him. And he left his phone in my car, and he needed it the next day because he was flying to Europe, and so I FedExed his phone for $150 to New York. But anyhow, one of the things he spoke about at this dedication ceremony was how extraordinary it is that we could take stone and glass and express the ineffable, to express the Holy Spirit, to express this sense of wonder out of stone and glass. And so that really stuck with me. I want to contextualize what happens next in Paris, because when I went to work for Skidmore, Owings & Merrill in 1980, this building was just coming on the scene, IMP's Louvre. And so here's the quote in the New York Times. "It doesn't seem justified to treat the courtyard of the Louvre like a Disneyland annex. This is a despotism, and insurrection is the first duty. It's outside our mental space, a gigantic, ruinous object." And so, needless to say, the French were outraged, and outrage is a national sport in France. And I love the French, and I love their outrage, and it's humorous because now the Louvre, well, if I was saying this 2 weeks ago, it would have been more interesting. This week, the Louvre's having some problems, but this is a beloved symbol of France. And IMP said at this moment, to respect tradition, you also have to think about the need for change. How many of you have been to the Louvre? So a lot. And when you go through that visitor center that he created, imagine how it was before. You couldn't get in, you couldn't get around. And so IMP created something really very unique, very extraordinary. So something quite special and positive. Whoops, I'm going the wrong way. So Edouard Philippe announces an international design competition. This is obviously a huge challenge of historic responsibility, noting a new design and spire would give the cathedral a new meaning, adapted to the new times. Norman Foster had proposed a glassy top, and he wrote in The Guardian, "In every case, the replacement used the most advanced building technology of the age. It never replicated the original design. In Chartres, the 12th century timbers were replaced in the 19th century by a new structure of cast iron and copper. The decision to hold a competition for the rebuilding of Notre Dame is to be applauded because it is an acknowledgement of that tradition of new interventions." So I share with you, I went and did one of my analytiques photographically of Chartres. And what you're looking at here is the cast iron structure. So in 1867, there was a lightning strike that ignited the roof, and it burned the cathedral for the 5th time. And so they decided, never again. We are not going to allow this to burn. The Brits had just done the Crystal Palace, and so they went to Britain, they learned about cast iron, and they built the roof in cast iron. So this is what Norman Foster is referring to, that now Notre Dame, in bringing its cathedral back, should use the latest technology. Well, so this is an American architect who writes this about Viollet-le-Duc's addition. The spirit of Viollet-le-Duc hovers above the finials and buttresses of Notre Dame. Let us hope French authorities recognize his importance as they consider replacing any elements lost in fire, especially les flèches, the spire, at the apex of the crossing. Any less would be an affront to their nation and the world. This is what it looked like. This is what had happened. So I had formed this relationship. I had been trying to get in, and I've been thinking about doing a piece, an analytique, where half of the cathedral is burning and half of the cathedral is restored. So I've reached out to Michel Picot and I say, you know, I want to get in while it's burned because I want to photograph the inside. And so I had it all arranged. And the day I was meant to go in was a day that there was a stabbing on Ile de la Cité. Many of you may know the police station is right there. And 4 police officers were stabbed on the day I was to go in. And so I call André Finot and he says, you won't be coming in. Ile de la Cité is closed. I can't even get to my office. So I was so disappointed, and I'd been to France a number of times. It was very difficult to get in because there was lead poisoning, 3,000 tons of lead in the air, in the ground. So finally, I got to go in, and so I go in, and you see this sign. I think what that means is stay out. There's no way that you're coming in here. That's what's outside. You go through this gate, and there's a high-rise setup of construction trailers. I go into the construction trailer, and here I'm presented with this plastic bag with my name on it, a hard hat, and a size 10 pair of boots because I had given them my boot size. So what you have to do, and you have to go through a half an hour orientation meeting, which is all en français, and je comprends pas, I didn't understand a word. And so after they said, do you understand? And all that, yes, of course. Bien sûr, yes, I do. And so what it meant was you had to take all of your clothes off, put them in a garbage bag, put on this jumpsuit with undies, a t-shirt, and a coverall, the boots, the hard hat, and a mask, and go in to the cathedral. And when you come out, you have to take all that off, take a shower. They gave you this thing of soap there. At the top is an LVMH soap because LVMH donated, I think, 200 million euros to the renovation of Notre Dame. So that was to remove the lead that would have gotten on your body. The photograph on your left is a photograph from the press. The photograph on the right is what it looked like when I was going through. It was all scaffolded, and I was so disappointed not to have the destruction photographs, but quite delighted to get to go. So this was the group, and very small group. It was the head of Chateau Margaux, the famous Côte de Rhône wine. It was the head of Jones Day, an American attorney in Paris, because they gave. And so it was all large donors, and this photographer guy from Chicago. And so that's how I got to go through. And this is what it looked like inside. So one of the things that's extraordinary, I guess I didn't really properly give you a picture. I was reading the things. So what happened was there was absolute outrage in France that these modern additions would be made with glass roofs to the most sacred building in France. And ultimately, it was absolutely shut down, and it became a thing of Macron against the people. And the people were absolutely against any modern intervention. They wanted the church as it was. So as it turns out, there was a young architect who, for his degree project, did measured drawings of all the wooden joints in the roof of Notre Dame. And so when Notre Dame burned, Rémy Froment, this guy, they go and find him and they say, we'd like you to be the work with the architect du chef to manage the reconstruction of the interior of the church. Now, a little thing about fire protection in medieval times. What they did is they built, I think it's 1,200 oak trees that were required to build the roof of the church. The idea was that when a church, if it burned, the wood would fall and it would hit the stone arches underneath. They would build a catenary arch so that it would keep the roof from going into the cathedral. So while the roof could burn from a lightning strike or whatever, it would not destroy the church. However, Viollet-le-Duc put this tower on Notre Dame in 1875, and when it fell, it broke the catenary arch and all of the fire went into the cathedral. This is what I saw. This is where the flesh fell and went through. And then this is the rose window. So it didn't hit the rose window. And you saw that mangled scaffolding around the tower during the fire. They were in the middle of a $100 million renovation of the stone around the nave, and they had just removed 2 days prior to the fire all 12 statues to go for restoration as part of the stone restoration work. So all of those were saved, which is just remarkable. And the windows were not destroyed, and they built this scaffolding so that they could work on them, and then they rebuilt the stonework. In addition, they found screens and heads in the excavation that historians didn't know all this stuff was buried beneath Notre Dame. So these, if you go to Paris and you want to see what was taken from the renovation, this is in the Cluny Museum, which is on Ile de la Cité, not far from Notre Dame. So this is Rémy Froment. This is the young architect. And Rémy and Philippe Villeneuve and André Finot and Michel Picot all came to the University Club to raise money, and they did this big presentation. And they had invited me to this event. I went to the event, and they invited me to a small private dinner. So I got to sit with Rémy at this little dinner at the University Club, maybe in, I would guess it was 2022, something like that. And we just had a great chat and a nice time. And so it just so happened, and this is Michel Picot, and it just so happened that a dear friend of mine was having her 70th birthday party in Paris on December 3rd, and the cathedral was opening on December 8th, and you saw Macron and Trump and all the dignitaries there. So I had written Michel Picot. I said, look, I'm going to be in Paris, and I really want to come to the open. And he goes, oh, he says, Macron has an embargo on all the tickets. I could get you one ticket. I said, 2 tickets, please. And so I was scheduled to come back to Chicago after this kind of extraordinary birthday party in Paris. And so I got the 2 tickets, changed my flight, and so Allison, my girlfriend, and I got to go to the opening mass where all of the tradesmen were there, and it was called the Donors' Mass, and people who were donors came. So I walk into the cathedral. It's raining outside. It's a kind of a crummy day in December, and I walk in, and the center aisle is blocked, and we can't get through. And so I say to a person, is there a special seating for donors? And she says, no. She said, I suggest you walk around the side aisle. I walk around the side aisle, and I find seats in the front row. So I just sit down in the front row, Allison and I do, and this is what it looked like. It was, and so I want, I grew up Catholic. Really devout Catholics. Then, I married a Protestant woman and ended up on the board of Fourth Presbyterian Church and helped manage the reconstruction of Fourth Church. And then I became a Buddhist. So, my spiritual history is not a straight line. But one thing I will say is that there is a God. I believe in, now I'm in a Bible study going back to my religion of origin, and which is what the Dalai Lama said people should do. You should study in the religion of your origins. So for the last year and a half, I've been doing that. And so for me, it was a spiritual experience to be here, to see the physical rebirth, but also to witness something that transcended religion. It transcended, because the Notre Dame is owned by the French government. The Catholic Church is a tenant in the church because they consider this a cultural relic of great importance. So there's this negotiation back and forth between the church as a tenant, the politics of the government, who pays, how much, what are we doing, all of that good stuff. But I have to say that the environment that day was an absolutely electric environment, and really one of the great experiences of my life. Something very dear, very spiritual. I don't, quite extraordinary. So one of the things they did is, in America, when we do, am I talking too long? Yeah, I'm going to stop. I get excited and it just keeps going, and yeah. So this fella, they did a competition for the vestments and for the sacred furniture. So the altar is done by Guillaume Prenot, I think it is. He won the competition, and he did a new altar, which I think in bronze is just stunning. The crosses, the candelabras. He did the baptismal font with the silver on top representing water. They take it off when they do the baptisms, and then the lectern. also the crown of thorns was rumored to be inside the cathedral when it burned, and so they did this sculpture, and there was one of the managers of the cathedral went in and recovered a lot of sacred objects, including the crown of thorns. It turns out the crown of thorns that was inside the cathedral is not the crown of thorns. It's a replica, and now that replica is in this sculpture, and so they had another artist do this as a representation of the crown of thorns. Something else I found quite moving is they've now incorporated a series of pieces of modern art. Now there's outrage in France. We have modern altar instead of redoing the Gothic traditional altar. We have modern art, Brock carpet here and a painting. And they redid the organ, 8,000 individual pipes removed, taken out, and the whole thing retuned. The rose window, which was in my photograph, there it is. You see in my photograph, the rose window is completed, which isn't possible to photograph. So let's say I cheated a little bit. One of the things that Macron wanted to do to make his mark was to put these new leaded window with his visage in one of the windows. And the French people were not very happy about that. They were outraged. And so it has not happened. That did not go ahead. Le Flèche, the rooster on top, actually fell when Le Flèche burned, and Philippe Villeneuve, the architect du chef, found it in the yard, and it was replaced, and it is the symbol of France, of freedom, and there it is today. And here is the rose window, which I kind of adapted. What I did also was the photograph, the sky, I painted in. It's actually a full moon sky from full moon night at Mont Saint-Michel. I wanted the light of God coming out of the rose window. So this is a painting. It's not really a photograph. I'm finished. And I presume you have questions. And if you don't, that's
so
okay.
Those windows,
yeah.
Because there was a huge article in the New York Times about the artist and those windows, and I just assumed that they were going in and they're not going to go in there.
No, monuments, I'm forgetting the French name of the monuments. It's like our historic preservation group. Absolutely not. No, so they will not go in. And the reason that Macron thought it would be okay to do was those windows are not the medieval windows. Those were windows that were done by Viollet-le-Duc in the 1875 renovation. So he thought that since they weren't historic material, kind of, he could...
They were just going into a chapel, weren't they?
It's in a side aisle. It was not the rose windows. So it was a less prominent thing, but he wanted to have a little stamp on there. Yeah.
This isn't necessarily about Notre Dame, but I was curious how your relationship to architecture has evolved after moving in the direction of architectural photography, like versus making architecture. I was curious as an architect myself, kind of how, and someone who's also very, I don't know, as a hobby architectural photographer. I
Yep.
was kind of curious how your relationship to the
So it's a really good and interesting question. So architecture, what's the difference between building and architecture, right? The difference is language. Architecture employs language to communicate a set of feelings and ideas, right? We have Doric, Ionic, Corinthian. Those were the traditional classical language of architecture. And then we continued to move forward into Romantic era. You've got modernism. You've got, all of the eras. So architecture is a language. And so the analytiques were a way of communicating language, and architectural photography now with contemporary tools, Photoshop and so forth, you can actually make paintings. So most architectural photography today is a composite of, my architectural photographs. Like I shot Trump Tower, I shot, did a book for the University of Chicago, lots of things. They're paintings. You put many things together. So I look at architectural photography as a way to communicate what the language of architecture is. So it's not just about taking a handsome photograph, rather it's trying to have a visual representation of what the language of architecture is. Does that make sense? Absolutely. Yeah. So it's trying to get underneath. And the analytiques were not just about architecture. So for instance, I photographed in Istanbul what's the famous? Huh? Yeah, Hagia Sophia. So prior to it becoming, now it's a mosque, I couldn't do what I did. What was intriguing to me, that was built by Justinian in 850 or so, and it's a Greek cross. And so the organization of it, absolutely Christian in its fundamental organization. But in 1475, when it fell and it became Muslim, the turrets were put on top. And so now you see architecture that is this kind of Mr. Potato Head, eyes, nose, mouth, right? And so they put Muslim architecture, turrets and so forth on top of a Greek cross. And so I'm very interested in how architecture in time reflects culture, economics, war, religion, and all those things come together. So I tend to look at architectural photography as an expressive medium to play in that whole space. Does that make sense? Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
I'm not sure if I heard this right, but you said something about Macron wanting to put himself in the architecture and how everyone is outraged. And I was wondering, is that like a common practice with architects to sneak themselves into the architecture literally or?
Well, that's a really good question. So there are gargoyles around Notre Dame, and Viollet-le-Duc is rumored to be one of those gargoyles. And one of the reasons the Notre Dame was slated for demolition after the French Revolution because they cut the heads off the sculptures. They did, a lot of damage because, Marie Antoinette, it didn't end well for her. Let them eat cake. They beheaded her, Louis XVI. I mean, it was a mess because people couldn't eat, right? They were starving. So then Victor Hugo wrote Hunchback of Notre Dame, and it became this worldwide phenom, and that's why Notre Dame ended up being saved. The people of Paris ended up realizing this is an extraordinary piece of cultural heritage. But yes, it's not unusual for politicians. I think we have one doing something like that now. You know, it's like, I think he plans to use this thing, and so maybe he doesn't plan to be finished with being president when it's built. I don't know. Just saying. It's going to take a few years to build. Any other questions?
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Yeah.